it's Natasha, and thank you so much for joining me today. Well, these are the things that have been sitting out on my desk and I have been meaning to use. I purchased this Sunny Studio stamp set called Watering Can as something just a little bit different for me. I often pretty much stick with the sort of the normal things for me, like flowers and generic things that I can use for any different type of occasion, but I thought I could see this being used in lots of different ways, so I'm going to give this one a go. And also I have this die set here that kind of cuts out all of those different gorgeous circles. And I had gone to the effort of die cutting them all, so I need to use those up. But you will see what happens a little bit later in this video. First of all, I'm trying out the Watering Can stamp set. Now there is 2 layers to the Watering Can and I want to test a few things. I'm starting off by using a kind of medium blue ink. This is a VersaFine Clair ink. This is Pigment ink. It is going to sit on top of the paper beautifully, and this is one of the reasons why this is maybe my favorite ever ink to stamp with, because it stamps beautiful and solid. Absolutely perfect stamping one time. Then you are going to pop the second layer on top. It is very easy to line up. I also, on purpose, later on came back and kind of misaligned it a little bit, and it still looks really good, which is helpful for me because lining things up is often not my strong point. But lots of dimension created with just 2 layers, so I was kind of impressed with this one. As I said, I was branching out of my comfort zone just a little bit with getting this Watering Can, but now I want to try something. I used 2 different inks on the first version. Now I have the Morning Mist VersaFine Clair, which is just a grey ink. Now actually I'm going to ink this up, but I'm going to put a scrap piece of paper in here and stamp this off once before I get the second generation of stamping onto my actual piece of paper. So there I am stamping it off, and then here comes the second generation. So this gives me kind of 2 different layers of ink, but only using 1 ink pad. Now this is such a good hack if you have a limited amount of ink pads and you want to make it appear as though you have several different shades. This is a great hack. Use second generation stamping. Now I think the Watering Can looks better if you have the second layer in a darker ink. So you can see here this definitely looks like 2 different colors of ink. Now these both stamped beautifully and I love them both. So I'm going to do one more quickly where I use the Morning Mist, and then for the dark layer I'm going to use my VersaFine Onyx Black, my all-time favorite sentiment stamping ink. But then I'm going to do a comparison and use some Distress Oxide inks just so that you can get a good picture of why I love the VersaFine so much. Now, I definitely love different inks for different purposes. There's a reason that I have both of them. I'm going to use Mustard Seed, which is my lighter color, and Wild Honey, which is going to be a slightly darker color. Now, these are going to stamp okay. I did have a little bit of trouble getting the ink to kind of stick nicely to the stamp, even though these are photopolymer, and it did bead up a lot. Now, obviously you just saw me stamping, so these had been stamped before, but you can see it's kind of got a speckly, grainy look to it. Now, in my opinion, this is just how the oxides come out. There are ways that you can fix this. You could obviously kind of go over with a watercolor brush and give it a bit more of a watercolor look. These are going to be water reactive, and so that way you are able to smooth out the color a little bit, or I mean just ignore it. It stamps pretty good, and unless you are comparing it side by side with something else, then of course that's when you can see the most obvious differences. But this does look fine. It does look absolutely fine. I would use this on a card, but I did really enjoy the results of the VersaFine Clair inks. Now, there's also there's 2 butterflies in the set, and they have their layering butterflies to go on top as well. I went to town. I had a whole lot of fun with these. I used very few inks actually. This one here is just the same ink, but it is just first and second generation stamping. So on the left I stamped off, and then on the right I stamped with the next generation of it. Now these are the Watering Cans I ended up with, and I absolutely love them. So there are dies available for this set. set, but as per usual, I didn't purchase them, so I'm just going to fussy cut out the watering can, and this is not hard. There's all nice, smooth, straight edges that I'm able to fussy cut, and then I did decide to fussy cut inside the handle. Again, this actually wasn't as bad. I kind of poked a hole, and then from there, you can kind of get bigger and bigger, and I was able to carefully go around the inside because it does get a little bit skinny, but yeah, no trouble fussy cutting the inside of that one too. To make things look really clean and crisp, I get a marker pen that is a similar-ish color to what I've had stamped in, and then I go around the outsides trying to come from the back because usually I make a mess, and I will just go around the edges of my fussy cutting, and this makes it look like my fussy cutting was perfect. Now, it's just one of those small things. You don't have to do it, but it is just one of those extra little things. Then I'm going to take some squeezed lemonade, wild honey, and mustard seed, and this is going to become my background. Well, it's actually going to become a small portion of my background just because I had this little piece of paper here and I had already die cut the top of it, and I think this was a leftover scrap, and so I try really hard to have a small scrap pile, and I often have to on purpose kind of end up using it and change my plans so that I can use my scraps. Otherwise I feel like my scrap pile would just grow and grow and grow and there would be no end to it. So I really do have to curb my thinking to think, right, how am I going to use this with today's project? And sometimes the idea doesn't come super fast, but once I start adding colors and things, I figure out how I can incorporate it into my project. I am using a little bit of vintage photo there as well, just to kind of give it that brownie look. And I just dry it and then dip it and then dry it and dip it. And that way I get lots of lovely layers with the Distress Oxide inks. That is definitely one of their strong points. Now I have this stamp set here. This is just a mini one from Fairy Hugs, and this is called Forest Flowers. Now it has these kind of little sprigs of foliage, I guess you could call them. I guess some are sort of foliage, some are branches, and there's a couple of flowers in there. And so I took 3 of these and wanted to arrange these to come out of the watering can. This is going to be directly onto my card base at this point. My card base is 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches, and I just wanted to do some sort of multicolored inking. So I'm taking my finger daubers, and most of these I just use the ink that is left on the finger dauber, and that means I don't have to get my ink pads out and I don't have to get super crazy. It's really a way that I do things to be efficient with time. Instead of having to get all the ink pads out, I just use the ink that is left on my little finger daubers. So here I'm able to do a little bit of brown down the center and some reds and oranges on the first sprig. Then I pop the next sprig in and do the same thing, and you can kind of adjust as you go along if you don't get exactly the look. I did a couple of flowers in the orange, and by then my little orange was sort of running out of some of the ink on it, so I used a different little finger dauber and then changed it up to some reds, and that's pretty much how I came up with my colors. Which is not a very good way, but it's the way that I choose sometimes to be efficient with time rather than getting out all of the ink pads. So I stamp out these little sprigs, and I quite like this. I like these. They just are quite simple, and I think these would look gorgeous as silhouette stamping in a solid color, but I also really love them doing this as well. Now, to bring in a little bit more interest into the background, because nothing is embossed, I don't have any texture going on in the background, it's pretty plain at this time, and I know it looks a little bit funny, but I promise this will all come together. I have put some wild honey and a little bit of vintage photo down on my acrylic block, and I'm just going to do some very light splatters. Sometimes I find that the smaller the paintbrush, the thinner and sort of daintier the paintbrush, the smaller and daintier the drops will be. That's pretty much the rhyme that I use when choosing which brush to do my splatters with. Now here is the bit that we created earlier on, and I think I want this to be kind of the backdrop. So I actually used this gorgeous die set. This is the Winter Borders die set from Spellbinders, and I have a few videos coming up using this one because I think this is super versatile. Not only are there some really sort of larger off the edge detailed dies, but there are also some smaller, finer details, and then even ones that just add elements without die cutting. So I think there's a great range in here, and as I said, that's the reason I have a few more videos coming up using this one at least. Then I'm going to add a little bit of foam tape to the back of my watering can. From that die set I mentioned before, I had cut out one of them. This cuts both sides, it cuts the little border, and I thought this was just going to break up the background a little bit. So I put some double-sided adhesive down. This is going to help me attach my bottom part there. So this is hanging off the edge a little bit. I don't need quite everything, but I saved these little strips because I have a whole lot of videos on my channel around how to use up these sorts of scraps, so don't get rid of them. Then to adhere this gorgeous fine delicate border, I'm just using my usual trick of using a little piece of makeup sponge with some glue. This happens to be the Ranger Multi-Medium in the matte finish. That's the glue that I have in that little squeezy bottle, and this way I can dab it on the back of any delicate, intricate image or anything, and this way I can stick this down. It breaks up that gorgeous yellow, but it also adds something to ground my watering can. So this card came together, and for some reason I absolutely love this finished card, even though it was made up of sort of random elements, and I never ended up using these circles that I set out to use at the very beginning, but that is okay. Sometimes it's okay if my plans go a little bit left of field, but this gorgeous blue with the yellows and oranges I think just sets it off perfectly. I'm not going to add a sentiment, I'm just going to write in the middle, and I absolutely love this card. Just as finishing touches, I'm going to add some little glossy accents to be the center of those flowers, and I'll give you a close-up in a minute. If you're looking for supplies used in this video, as per usual, they are listed down below. Thank you so much for joining me. What do you think of my little watering can stamp? I'm quite impressed with myself that I managed to veer away from just flowers or butterflies or all those usual things. And other than that, thank you so much for joining me, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks, bye!